The Quiet Professional, a podcast about law enforcement, security, justice, and politics. We are digging deeper on the issues and going where the information takes us with access to experts and authorities. Welcome to The Quiet Professional. Hey everyone, welcome to The Quiet Professional. Today we're going to be talking about illicit economies, the individuals involved, and the broader challenges that they present. For this, I have Samantha Radocchia here. Sam is a futurist, anthropologist, and four-time technology entrepreneur. She is the founder of Radical Next and has held multiple founding C-suite roles. She is also a best-selling author, inventor, and advisor to organizations such as the United Nations and Federal Reserve. But what actually connects us here today is she is the co-founder of Illicit Shadows, LLC, which explores the illicit networks shaping the global underworld. So welcome, Sam.
Thank you for having me.
I wanted to, as we were saying off air, just talk a bit about you to start. And you're an anthropologist by trade. And I can say I don't know any anthropologists personally. And then especially ones that have crossed over into this world where you're kind of talking law enforcement, security. So can you just give us a bit of background on yourself? What brought you into anthropology? What interests you? But also how you made this connection into what you're doing now?
You know, first off, I don't think anyone knows an anthropologist. I'm maybe like the first that I meet as well. But, you know, I had a bit of a long and winding journey. I did that as an academic discipline, mainly because I was interested in observing people and human behavior. So I had initially started down a different path, which was neuroscience, and that was way too sciencey for me. And I appreciated the methodologies of anthropology, which involved a lot of field work, or what we call ethnography. So it's just observing people and documenting things. So, you know, kind of even then there was the overlap with a bit of perhaps your world. And so during those early years, I was observing mainly online communities or people's new relationships to technology. And that brought me into the technology world. So I was one of the first anthropologists to live completely in a virtual world called Second Life. So this was in 2009.
Okay.
And I had noticed a whole bunch of things going on there beyond just people, you know, living their lives in this new virtual environment, but also transacting things, virtual assets, early crypto. So Bitcoin had just kind of become a thing at that point in time. And it fascinated me. And unfortunately, in respect to anthropology as an academic discipline, none of the departments wanted to support me to continue my studies further in the digital realm. Like this was a very old school type of study where you have to like go to a jungle somewhere and, you know, properly embed yourself in a community of people. And I think the internet was just too new of a landscape at the time. Now it's actually an entire discipline, right? Digital anthropology. And, you know, it overlaps again with certainly anything one might see in the law enforcement community, things like fraud or all the stuff that people do online, which we spend like 80% of our lives online. So
I'll say even on that, just to jump in, you know, I had a guest on here before who talked about the amount of recruitment that goes on online and how people interact, and there's a whole language around it.
Yeah.
Like it literally is another world, another community.
Yeah, I mean, anthropologists were among some of the early people documenting use of, let's say, emoji languages or online lingo, or use of social networking platforms or Telegram chats or Discord channels. Right. So there are a lot of people now who spend their time basically, you know, living in these environments, spending most of their time documenting it. I was just a little early. And so that's where I got the initial title of a futurist, but I think it's more broadly the concept of strategic foresight. So just kind of living or being involved in things before they become kind of like mass adopted. And that's another area of technology where, you know, criminals are early technology adopters. So if you're early in a technology like I was, and I went on to found a number of companies early in AI and machine learning and kind of the gaming space, early in blockchains and what became, kind of broadly crypto. And, from a researcher perspective, seeing all of this technology used for, illicit means as opposed to what we were trying to do with my companies, which was bring trust to global commerce. So again, it really started through the anthropological lens of watching and observing technology. And then I decided at some point, I really want to make an impact by building solutions or building technologies to solve some of the problems I had seen.
Yeah. I was going to ask on the futurist thing because I wasn't sure if that was like a specific discipline or it's like it's like a term that was given to you. But so it is a term. It's just acknowledging that you were able to kind of see things ahead of time or you were first into a space.
Yeah, I would never give myself such a title, such a bold title. And there are quite a few futurists these days, but I was notoriously early, too early to build any I'd say viable companies because they were always like 5 to 10 years too early. So things that I've worked on are still being used today, but it would take 10 years on the adoption curve to get there. So again, the first one was I was interested in how people shape their perception and taste. And so it was kind of like an AI agent, but in 2010 for the fashion space. And then that brought me into supply chain and inventory management, which brought me into a broader company that used blockchain for supply chain security. And that's when I really came into kind of a different world. So this was starting in 2015. And of course, I had brushed with these other, I'd say, parallel shadow economies from the beginning of my research. You can't avoid it, right? You're in a virtual world and you're seeing people sell drugs on a video game. And I'm like documenting it. Okay, so people do a number of things like trade concert tickets, sell cocaine. And I can't do anything about it, right? I'm just a college student researching this stuff. And by 2015, I come together with a group of people, very early, examples of blockchain technology to basically track everything on this planet in every supply chain. And so when you start to get into that, I saw not just disparate problems, right? But across different industries, but how they also connected.
Yeah. So how did you end up connecting on the Illicit Shadows project? Like what eventually made you kind of go into this realm of things?
Right. So David Luna, who's my partner and co-founder in Illicit Shadows, and I connected in, I'd say it was around 2016 or so, or around that time with my company Chronicled. So this is the company that was bringing trust to global commerce. He was an advisor to our company. And we started working together on a number of projects to educate the public on the harms facing them from illicit economies. I was still writing then for Forbes magazine and kind of doing some media stuff along with building this company. And, it was impactful. I'd say I was at that point in time still quite young, and I wouldn't say naive, but I didn't understand yet how complex these challenges were on a global scale. And I became a bit almost like frustrated by the experience of that company wanting to make an impact and then seeing how big the problems were. So, some years go by, I continue to stay in touch, build companies, and I ultimately end up in Latin America doing finally what a proper anthropologist should do, which is spending some time in a number of countries doing, I'd say, independently guided field work. And
so you're hanging out in the jungle.
Yes, if you want to say that more bluntly, I was hanging out in some jungles and, I saw a lot of the problems that we had been working on with that company, which was on like a very macro scale. And I was just a techie, right? Working on like software and hardware and devices to track things. I wasn't really, and I was in, meeting with different partners, and we were, a perfect example of this is we had a partner that was tracking responsibly sourced gold from mine to vault. And so, that partner was vertically integrated and had mines in Brazil and, of course, the vaults in Switzerland and everything in between. And so I get to go to these places, and this is back in, again, 2016, 2017, and see it just from the lens of like, okay, let's put our tracking microchip on this stuff and prove chain of custody. Yeah. And wow, like our software works. And, I start to see these things then firsthand. Now, when I'm wandering these jungles, we'll call it that, and observing what seems to be disparate groups actually connected. And a number of the challenges in the illicit economies really connecting anything from, real estate fraud to wildlife trafficking to critical minerals, right? And human trafficking and smuggling. And I'm seeing this all firsthand. And again, I say, wow, I can't get away from this. It's everywhere. It's as if at some point in time I had put on a pair of glasses that gave me this really awful view of the world. And everywhere I look, I see crime and criminality. And so, right, I call David. I say, I don't know.
I'll say some of David's posts will do that to you.
It will, but and I'm out there like in the middle of the jungle and I'm like, I don't know what to do about this. This is just too much. And he's like, keep doing your part, right? And sharing stories and contributing to solutions in the ways that I had. And we came together shortly thereafter in Washington, D.C. and met. And, he proposed to me working on this project, which started as a documentary, Illicit Shadows, to document not just the kind of individual issues shaping a particular location, but really the convergence of seemingly unrelated, illicit economies and how they come together to shape the global, kind of parallel economy. And then it's evolved since then over the past couple of years.
And I think you bring up a really critical point there of one, well, there's a couple things in there. One is educating the public. Yeah. Nobody is doing that, like outside of these things that you're doing. So that's why I really appreciate this type of work. Two is the complexity of this whole thing going on around the world and bringing these seemingly independent issues together and showing people just how connected they are. Where there's money to be made, there's 100% there's going to be crime, like regardless of what it is. You can sell stolen dishwashers, as one of my former bosses always says, to wildlife, to whatever it might be. Where there's money to be made, crime will find a way. Mm-hmm. I kind of describe it, when I talk to even some law enforcement now, I try to get it through their minds that it's not just the nice Christmas tree. There's the one group or one person at the top, and it just flows down from there. It is the best way I can describe it is it's a constellation. Mm-hmm. And it's like you have a bunch of stars and planets, and the people in them are all different kind of sizes, like whether they're a big group or a big person in this group. But they all got gravitational pull, and they're all moving each other around, and some are getting closer to others, further away from others. And then things are crashing into each other. You have all your conflicts. Mm-hmm. So that's the best way I could describe it, is that is the complexity that is out there. Now, to get it through to the average person, the voter, because that's very important, how do we do that on a big scale? So that's where I kind of see a lot of this crossover with the anthropology and how you talk to people about it. But law enforcement, I'll critique law enforcement on this side of it. They're very slow on the uptake when it comes to new ideas and incorporating people. But I'm, especially through this podcast, one of the things I always try to do is let's just bring other ideas in the room. People from outside have different points of view. They got a different lens, different glasses to see these things through. So we need all the help we can get, because the problems are far too big for any one person or one industry to take on.
Yeah. I mean, as cited by the ICAIA, so International Coalition Against Illicit Economies, that's David's initiative and that we've partnered with. they estimate it's something like $6 to $7 trillion economy in
Yeah.
US dollars. I mean, that's massive. That's one of the top 5 global economies if we're looking at the kind of interconnected illicit economies. So this is bigger than any one nation state or government. It will require collaboration, right? And certainly different perspectives from different areas and sectors of the economy, because it's not now just I'd say a law enforcement problem if they're operating also in the licit economies, right? So we're
Yeah.
not just talking about the kind of the old school uh, level of criminality. We're also having like legitimate companies at scale competing with other legitimate companies, and the lines get blurred.
You know what? That's a good example. And I'll use just from some of my own work I've seen where we deal with like the Hells
Mm.
Angels. I'll use them as an example. And you have individuals from those groups have legitimate businesses from travel agencies to construction. They're always in construction. And, but then people take real money and go and
Yeah.
give it to those businesses, not knowing that behind the scenes, that money is then going to be funneled into something else that might come back to hurt you or your community or your country. So yeah, it's very intertwined with the say the economy that's on the up and up. So where have you been able to kind of have the most impact as far as you're aware of? Like, is it more in a policy realm, or are you seeing people actually change policy procedure at a law enforcement security level? Like where, what are the impacts that you're seeing?
I mean, I don't want to sound too ambitious, but I will. I mean, our hope is to have impact on every level, whether that's from the general public, and as you mentioned, how they make decisions and how they vote, to law enforcement and the operational level, and of course, government and policy, which then informs, the operational level.
Hmm.
And it really depends, and that's why we have envisioned multiple different formats, whether it's the documentary series, which are now formatted to be what I call docu snippets. So 3 to 5 minute episodes, even shorter, like 90 seconds, that we're finding people are just texting around to WhatsApp groups or private chats, and less so, kind of wide distribution on the internet, though we are on the social networks and YouTube and, perhaps in the future, the streaming services. And then for the general public, right, we are forming the first museum of illicit shadows. So museum focused on this kind of area that isn't really educated about or discussed. And that of course would have a wider public but global impact because we're bringing it online as well. And then on the policy side as well, even some of our early research. So we completed season 1, which was focused around fentanyl, and also where you're from, kind of the Canada-US relationship to
Yeah.
that has, been cited in a number of sources. So again, as we move forward into other, areas of impact, our hope would be to continue to kind of hit that trifecta.
Have you had the ability to talk directly with any governments or law enforcement agencies? And what has the reception been like? And I ask that because I know it can be a super difficult world to break into.
I can't name names. Yeah.
Yeah, you can go ahead and name names on here. You can swear on here. You can do whatever you
Yeah.
like. So, but I'm just wondering, like, who do you actually find is a willing partner, a willing ally, like through and through, truly
Mm.
actually trying to make a difference? And then who's, I'll say, being stubborn, but you can call them whatever you want to call them.
Yeah. I mean, that's a tricky question. I think at the upper levels of government and policy, of course, there are always competing agendas and initiatives. And so
Hmm.
that gets more into diplomacy. And some of these topics, of course, are sensitive, and there are different opinions in the room. I'd say on the level of law enforcement, the reception has been completely different, which is very excited and enthusiastic to
Good.
collaborate. As you mentioned, and you yourself coming from that domain, it's needed to
Mhm.
raise awareness, and perhaps even encourage more resourcing or funding or abilities to actually do something about this. I know in the US, right, and regardless of one's personal politics on the fentanyl issue, um, you know the US president designated the cartels involved in some of this trade as foreign terrorist organizations. You can have opinions on
Yeah.
that, but then that also gives more resources to the individuals working on those issues.
Yeah, it gives some more tools and
Yeah.
funding. Well, and even on that, so on the law enforcement side, I always find one of the things that maybe we have the most difficulty with, and I'll say there is a difference between Canada and the US. The US seems a little more gung ho, like to jump
Mm,
on things, but in Canada, we are a little slower to open the door to outsiders and work with people in different industry and very different thought processes. But I think the biggest disservice that we do to ourselves as law enforcement is the messaging. And that's where I really see like a lot of this stuff. I think the way we do it is very, very, I don't want to say soft, but it's like we're so worried about someone criticizing us
mm,
or some sort of backlash or, you painted us that whatever group in this way. Whereas some of the things that you can do from the outside are a little less worried about that. You have a little more freedom. So the messaging, I think, like in partnership with law enforcement, the messaging that you'd be able to do with illicit shadows, um, would just be next level. And then going back into the education of the public, I think that becomes very critical. I mean, they're the ones again who vote for the people who go in to politics, then the politicians create the policy that allows law enforcement to do what they need to do. I can only work within the law. If I don't have a law or it's a weak law, it doesn't allow me to go after the bad guys. So, it kind of comes full circle. So that's just where I see like illicit shadows is very useful and very helpful is that whole messaging and the marketing of it all.
mhm.
But maybe that was the intention.
Yeah, I mean, the intention, of course, is to be collaborative as well with all of these groups and across borders, because that's, again, what we need to fight
Mhm.
issues as large and complex as the ones that we're discussing. And so, again, I'll joke and say this when I'm on have interviewing people or in conversation or learning is I'm not a journalist. And that might be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on who I'm talking to. But I mean, I'm an anthropologist. And so there is a different um, perspective here. I think there's been a lot of
Mhm.
distrust, and I don't know if it's the same in Canada, but distrust of the media and distrust of journalism that someone's going to
Yeah.
come in and want to like dupe someone or do a hit piece or tell a different story than the one
Yeah.
that they're conveying. And that's unfortunate that um that institution has had some of these issues over the years just for the sake of getting more clicks and eyes. And that's just the nature of pretty much every industry these days. But we're taking a different approach, right? It's more of investigative research. I consider myself a researcher, work with other
Mhm.
researchers. And in terms of that, that's bringing back the concept, I'd say, of journalistic integrity or just integrity in general. So we are not going in I did spend a lot of time in Canada with partners in Canada, and we're very open in building trust of saying, look, we're not even filming anything, we're not documenting anything, we're just spending time and really looking how we can best tell this story. And it's not something
Yeah.
that I believe, of course, I might have a perspective or my colleagues might have a perspective of how we want to tell a story or how we think it's shaping up to be or what is connected because everything is connected. But then when you're on the ground and you're talking to people, you might see other connections, and that might be more intriguing and also more helpful and impactful to tell.
Yeah. So when you're doing your stories, like how did you pick the topics and then decide on, how you're going to break it down? Because you said if people go look this up, like, you can see them all on YouTube. They're short clips, but what made you decide on that format and how many to do? And because it's such a big
Yeah.
thing to kind of capture.
I don't know. I kind of pulled like a Carrie in Homeland and just had like a board of things
Yeah.
like cork board with connections. No, but jokes aside, we had started with the concept of a full feature length documentary. And I started plotting out this documentary with, again, our tagline, everything is connected. And so, how can we tell a story that starts with fentanyl and ends up in South America looking at gold and then somehow is now in the Arctic and has moved over to like lithium mines and blood batteries and continue with this story of seeing how all these things are interconnected around the globe across locations and countries and individuals, both on the macro scale and the micro scale. And it was, of course, it's complex. And so we're talking about if we want to make an impact to the people that we've listed, whose attention spans now, all of us, are under maybe 4 seconds. So
Yeah.
it just seemed like that was too long to start with the long piece versus building to the long piece at the end. And so I
Okay.
really wanted to make these shorter episodes, kind of like Anthony Bourdain of crime or something like that. And so instead of food, it's let's talk about crime and criminals. And really, we were just testing these things and putting them out. And this shorter snippet format was something that really could go across platforms. It's easy to share, right? Even through like a text message or messaging app where individuals are sharing it. And then to split it up, again, we started with the bigger story. In this case, for the listeners who haven't seen it, we focused on fentanyl. And mainly the areas that we hadn't really looked at, right? Of course, there have been plenty of stories around, the Mexican cartels and the influence of, let's say, Chinese precursor chemicals or pill presses and things like that, but not necessarily digging into other angles, particularly some of what has been happening in Canada and the northern routes and relationships and beyond. And so that's where that one went.
I say you're going to do a Blame Canada episode next, like South Park.
It was definitely not a Blame Canada episode. I think it's something where we also share a very big border and we're allies and friends. And I think it was intriguing to see, particularly we were in Vancouver, the impacts, one, just in the downtown east side. And I know I'm from the US and I spent a lot of time in the Pacific Northwest and San Francisco during one of my tech companies. And fentanyl became, really kind of hit the streets during that time when I was there. And I'd walk to work every day, the hour to work through, 6th and Mission, which is in San Francisco, a pretty terrible intersection. You shouldn't really be walking there, but I did it every day and saw the change. And so when I came and saw the downtown east side in Vancouver, and I was with some partners from your area, and saying, watch out. And I'm like, okay. And it was really devastating though. And so I think the thing is the impacts are hitting our communities all across North America, right? Regardless of the country we're talking about. And it's something that is so much bigger than many people know.
Yeah. When you're doing the series, are you able to kind of pivot? If you, like you were saying, you're out in the field and then you might see something that's really interesting. Can you pivot and then like the next episode of the show will just go in that direction, or is everything kind of preset?
No, we can pivot. The goal as on the techie futurist side of my life, right? I advocate for adaptability across any organization, and I would be doing ourselves a disservice if we as well were not able to pivot that quickly. I mean, in an ideal world, I can get our process to a point where we are in the field and actually doing things and able to launch an episode the next day. Now, we're not there yet because, of course, we want to verify that everything that we're receiving is adequately researched and checked and supported by evidence. So, of course, there needs to be an editorial process. But,
Yeah.
generally, by shortening the episodes, we can move more quickly.
Is it largely just you and a camera person just out in the field once you actually go out to do these? Just the two of you?
I don't know. This too much of the behind the scenes look of this. It depends on what we're doing, I suppose.
Okay. I'm just thinking like some of the neighborhoods you might go through, it's like
Yeah,
you might actually want security there.
yeah. In those
Well, I was
cases,
gonna say, and just where it might go in the future, like if you start going to the longer formats, maybe your plan is to embed yourself
mhm.
kind of with some of these groups, right? Like you see some of the journalists are hanging out with cartels.
Yeah.
Like is that kind of the plan of you looking at both sides of it, or it's just to show more from one angle specifically?
No, I again, the anthropological side of me, again, our training is to embed ourselves in what we are studying. You know, that's still up in the air. I think to your point on some of these journalists that spend a lot of time with, let's say, cartels as an example, I've watched a lot of that content. Some of it seems to really humanize some of these people a little too much. And again, as an anthropologist, people are people. I'm fascinated by all of them and their stories. Because if you know the background or from an individual perspective, oftentimes they're individuals exploited by a larger system that's beyond their control. But at the
Hmm.
same time, some do seem to have a spin that is, kind of in favor of one side or the other. I'd prefer to.
Yeah, it's softening the
It is.
image.
I saw one. It was like a cartel, or not. He was an assassin, right? And this guy spends about an hour hanging out with him, talking about his kills, and then making jokes. And they lost some of the weight of the subject matter. And again, that's
Yeah.
kind of a editorial decision, and of course the goal of whatever they were doing. I think for us, we do have perspectives that we want to share, and opinions of really showcasing the, let's say, frontline professionals working
Hmm.
against these illicit economies that are very damaging and very detrimental to societies around the world, and are quite dangerous. And so in that case, I don't know how much where we'll see if it's like fully embedded secretive stuff, or just really working with the people who are already doing that and sharing some of their stories.
As a futurist, I want to ask is, and especially with the AI side of things, I think law enforcement's already, we're miles behind in
Mm,
the things that are being done with AI and some of the things it's going to be used for on the bad side of things. But what do you see as maybe coming out of that? In, I guess I could frame it as, how do you see criminals using AI, and what's the kind of the biggest problems we're going to see from that, or are starting to see that maybe as law enforcement, governments, we're not doing something about yet?
yeah, I actually give a speech, so I do give speeches as a living when I'm not doing this, and it's called "Think Like a Criminal, Act Like an Agent." It's quite fun. It mostly focused on fraud, but I think the number one AI driven crime impacting us over the next decade will be audio and visual impersonation. So let's say deep fakes. And,
Hmm.
by chance, the futurist side of me, as part of my research, I was one of the early people to robustly deepfake myself in 2020. So I, create a clone that could be doing this on my behalf instead of me, which is quite scary. And it's, I swear it's me.
So you're not really here
No, I
right
just
now.
sent her to do the work.
Yeah.
We needed a secret passcode or something for this. But
Yeah.
that aside, I'd say, like, reeling back kind of the more, that feels like something out of a movie. And certainly we can do these things, but impersonating anything. So let's say it's impersonating or quickly spinning up an organization, a shell company. Now, the resources to do that might have taken some enablers or taken some legal stuff to do at a point in time. But now I can run a script. I wouldn't be doing this, but hypothetically, a bad actor that could spin up companies, spin up websites, spin up customer networks, and do these every other day. And they're already doing this, but at scale. Same thing with the encrypted communication products and using certainly AI to help kind of devise new methods and protocols or tools for communication or doing business. I think this is where criminals are, again, early tech adopters. They're ahead of those that are, on the other side. And I would encourage folks from, any discipline as well as law enforcement to embrace the mindset, I wouldn't say of criminals, but of early adopters, and be open to trying new things, whether that's new technologies or even new organizational styles or work styles. So in some of my earlier companies, we experimented with kind of decentralized organizational structures, more flat structures versus hierarchies. And, interestingly, a lot of criminal organizations or organized crime are structured in such ways, and they are quite efficient in what they do. So it makes you think, perhaps other organizations should consider different working styles as well. But again, back to your point on AI and criminals, I suppose pretty much anything that they're doing now will be supercharged with the help of these tools. And it also condenses the need for resources or personnel. So what might have taken a state actor in the past, and now let's say, transnational organized crime group could now be a lone wolf, just kind of, individual or group of individuals that can have the same negative impact.
I kind of think on that. You used to see like phone call scams or call centers, and you might have there'd be 1,000 phones on the wall, and there's a whole bunch of people typing on a computer. And it's like, well, now you just need one computer with some AI, and it replaces all of this.
Yeah.
and it could be one person or one person working for a state that's doing all of this. So it's pretty scary to think about, like, just the capacity that some of these things have, and then on the scale, like how fast it can scale up.
Yeah, and even again on the topic of scams or the romance scams or any of the online kind of low-hanging fruit, right? Because anyone from anywhere around the world can target any individual. And now many people have put their entire lives out for public consumption, which is any public, whether it's criminal or law enforcement or what have you. And from that perspective, I think we're all at risk, or many of us, to these types of scams, whether it's a simple phishing scam that have become way more sophisticated, or again, to the level of complete impersonation, right? There have been a few examples of scammers calling home saying, I've kidnapped your daughter, and then put on the cloned voice of the supposed, victim, and, doing kidnap for ransom scams, essentially, which is big business for a lot of those groups. But they actually kidnap people. So if they don't need to do the work of the actual kidnapping and just run the scam, wow.
Well, and a lot of times it's from countries that are not going to be cooperative with us as law enforcement. So really, you send your money to wherever it's going. That's it.
Yeah.
Like, case closed. There's not a lot we're going to be able to do. As you're saying that, it kind of made me think. It's like, that's why I just don't have any friends. Like, nobody should be calling me. If somebody calls me, I'm like, not today. No, you're not getting my money today. Or if it's the government, the people sending like the gift cards as payment to the IRS or up here, our tax agency. And it's like, if someone called me and said that, I'd be like, that's nice. Come get me. Just see if someone shows up at my door. Yeah. So, just maybe it's a different mentality though, because I'm in law enforcement, I see all this stuff, but I could see there are some super sophisticated ones. But also, one of the things that was a very interesting case, and it's always stuck in my mind, was back when I was in patrols, this is like 7, 8 years ago now. I had a call I went to where there was this student here, and he was from China. And I don't know what he was taking university, but he drove a really fancy car. So he must have had some kind of money. And I probably had money in the first place to come here as a student too. But he had received a call, and whoever was on the other end of the line says, like, I'm with the government, the CCP, or whatever they said. You have to send me $10,000 now, or we're gonna mess with your passport. And his family's back there. So I can see how people, depending on the country you come from, it might not be hard to scam you,
Mm,
because you only need a little bit of a story. And it's like, well, this is a real possibility where I'm from.
yeah.
So it could be the government or whatever crime group. So some people are just that much more susceptible to it.
hmm Yeah. No, that's very interesting to think about at scale. How many people will be impacted. I know it's already, I don't know, at least for me or people I know are inundated by phishing attempts almost on a daily
Hmm.
basis. And I think about that also on, let's say, the more macro level from a cybersecurity perspective and our organizations that are securing, whether it's data or infrastructure or what have you, constantly being hit by attacks, which are probably more sophisticated in nature. But at the end of the day, again, some of the most sophisticated, let's say, cyber attacks involve compromising one person in some sort of way,
Yeah.
whether that's on LinkedIn, a social network, or just something super
Yeah.
simple. And so we tend to think, and again, you asked me from the perspective of a futurist, right? Of I can come up with all of this science fiction stuff and dazzle the listeners about what scary things criminals will be doing, because there's certainly like creative, really creepy, scary things that will happen. But oftentimes what ultimately happens is the most simple, low-hanging fruit. Again, people recruiting people over LinkedIn, or stealing data, or
Yeah.
scamming people in these very simplistic ways.
But that's why the education piece, like what you're doing, is one of the biggest components, because of protecting people. Because ultimately, like, police can't be
Mm,
everywhere. At the end of the day, the security agencies, the intelligence agencies, they only got so many resources. Individuals are their own best
yeah.
defense. So they have to be educated. And like I was saying at the beginning, that's kind of a step that I think has been missing from law enforcement's part. But that's like a whole of society approach. Like, we need everybody talking about this stuff. And it has to become a cultural thing.
hmm
And I think that's more prevalent in the US. They're like more distrusting of government or big corporations and stuff. Canadians very different in that realm. But it's just kind of the ecosystem you grow up in, and the environment, and proximity to other countries that you might not trust. Whereas Canada, we're pretty we've got it pretty good here. So we're like not thinking about these things. And it's not to make people paranoid, but it's the vigilance piece. Like, we just have to be more vigilant
hmm
and educated, and you know critically think about these things. Be the biggest critic out there. So uh, just as we're kind of coming up to the end of the time, I wanted to just ask one last thing. Is for yourself, now that you're working on this, do you spend most of your time in this realm of things, or do you actually have time to talk about all these different topics, or is this kind of preoccupying most of what you're doing right now?
It's always preoccupied most of what I'm doing, because I can't,
Okay.
can't get it out of my head. As I mentioned, I put on these glasses at some point in time, and then had like kind of the crime glasses. Though I do take
Hmm.
them off, and I spend quite a bit of my life, again, in the technology and futurism space, educating folks on the rapid changes that are impacting us, both in terms of technology and geopolitics, and just generally how our world is changing from a more I'd say optimistic and motivational perspective. This is like nighttime Sam goes and does this stuff. But
I said your alter ego, Samrad.
It is, yes. Samrad is much happier on the stages, but I think they're, again, everything is connected. And so at some point, and as I shared earlier, where, earlier in my career, I did become frustrated that our organization or many organizations couldn't make an impact, like even the slightest dent in this. And, it took some time really to reflect on it. And I couldn't, no matter where I went, no matter where I looked, I saw everything that I had already learned. And so I definitely came back in 10 years later with a new, well, hopefully more energy and a new perspective, which is always good. And, I devote as much time as I can and probably will for as long as I can be here to do it.
I think you have the same kind of feeling as I do. You see it from the same way in that, I go out there, I go call after call, but it's the same thing day after day. And then ultimately it's like, well, where are the big drug busts? Well, even when we do the big drug busts, it's like, that's a drop in the ocean. There's just so much more going on. So it's like, well, how do we actually make an impact? And that's why I like the stuff you're doing with Illicit Shadows, David's doing with his crazy posts scaring everybody and stuff. But he actually does he does some amazing work. So I do appreciate what he's doing with ICAIE. I got to get that right. But it's the education piece is a big part of it. So I want to say thanks for what you are doing with all of this, and I'll continue to support it and share it where I can. Where is the best place for people to find you and your work?
Yeah. So if you're listening and you're interested in supporting our cause and our mission, we're at illicitshadows.com. So just the name.com. And as mentioned, you can see our first season focused on fentanyl on YouTube and illicitshadows.com. Our next season that we're working on now is related to gold trafficking in the Amazon basin. And again, all the interesting connections that stem from there. So please do stay in touch. I'm also easily found on LinkedIn and the various social media networks at Samrad Official. So my shortened name, which is Samrad, though everyone here now knows me as Samantha Radocchia. And I look forward to staying in touch.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being on here today. And we'll definitely have to get you back on. And maybe David will join us next time too.
Yeah, that would be great. We should do that.
Okay. We'll chat soon.
Bye.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for listening in and following along with the discussions. Be sure to click the follow or subscribe button on your respective listening platform. Also, check out the Quiet Professional on X and Instagram under TQP780. And most importantly, please share where you can. Everyone has a part to play in getting these education and information pieces out there, so pass it along. Thanks again.